You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan, and I am here with my good friend and colleague, Mr. Brett Newcomb.
Hello. I understand that today we're going to be talking about the famous Lamont Cranston.
Yes, and for people who don't know who that is.
Who are not old enough to know, Lamont Cranston was the Shadow.
Yes.
Yeah. And actually, my young son knows Lamont Cranston and knows the Shadow because he's been watching it on YouTube somewhere. And we were...
Oh, really?
Yeah. My wife and I were discussing something about Shadow stuff, and he pipes in, "What evil lurks in the hearts and minds of men?" I'm like, "Oh my God, how do you know that?" Yeah. So
so he's been watching this
somewhere, yeah.
Obviously independent of you. So you haven't had the conversation with him and said, "Oh, I used to watch this show; it was great."
I used to listen to the show on the radio.
Yeah. That is.
How about that, sports?
That is back in the day, isn't it?
Yeah. We used to watch the radio when I was a little kid. We didn't have a television set. And we had a big floor model Philco radio with light tubes in it, and we'd lay on the rug in front of the radio and watch the radio.
Yep.
My grandmother would knit, and my grandfather would pass out drunk.
Yep,
that was our night at home. Yeah,
and I told this story in class just the other night when I was little, and I was trying to find things that I could get a good attention, a positive attention from my parents about. One of the things that I tried was I decided when I was really young I was going to start reading because my dad read all the time. Yeah. And so at the tender age of 10, and this was back in 1973 or something, 1974.
It just reminded me of how much older I am than you.
I joined, it feels like a long time ago for me. Okay. I joined what was called the Science Fiction Book Club.
Yes.
So you would send, and they had all these book clubs, and this was before Al Gore
like the Columbia Radio
built the internet.
Club that would send you records every day. Same thing, right.
And so you would send them $1, you'd get to pick out 4 books, and then every month they would send you a flyer, and you would have to mark, I don't want these. No, but they would have 2 on there that you would have to say, no, don't send. Otherwise, they would send them automatically, right? Yeah. And so at 10, I said to my mom, because I couldn't sign the paperwork because I was a minor. Yeah. I said, will you do this for me? And my mom was like, oh, heck no.
Yeah.
And I was like, why not? And she's like, you'll never send those papers back. I said, I'll always send the papers back. And I'm not going to lie, the entire time that my mom was on the hook for it, I always sent them back religiously. Now, I'm not going to say when I got to be an adolescent and I was old enough to be responsible for it myself, that I was always real good about that, because you see I have a lot of books.
Well, because man is a rational... Yeah. I say man is not a rational animal. Man is a rationalizing animal.
Yes.
So you were able to rationalize as a teenager that it was okay not to do that because you'd read those books anyway and you had the money to pay for them.
And that's true. So a lot of these books...
came from when you were
14. The Science Fiction Book Club, and I have read almost all of them.
Wow.
So, but I would start reading these books, and I went to my dad one night, and I said, Dad, when you read, do you see pictures in your head?
Right.
And he looked at me like I was insane and said, don't you ever say that to me ever again.
Oh.
And I said, okay.
Sure.
So what I got from that was that my dad did not see pictures in his head.
I think that would be a safe assumption.
And he thought that was crazy talk. But so I always assumed people did see little movies in their head when they read.
Yeah.
And I said this in class, and I was surprised at how many of my students said, I don't see pictures.
Right.
And so it never occurred to me that people didn't see pictures. I don't think it ever occurred to him that people did see pictures. So it's just a difference.
Why would the opposite occur to you at all?
Right, because you don't have a frame of reference.
Right. It's just like we used to talk about children growing up and parenting concerns and so on, and we'd say that the kids don't develop comparative parenting awareness until they're 5, 6 years old. When they go to school, and they hear other people's stories about what their lives are like. You know, at Joey's house, he gets to have cake anytime he wants it. You know, he has good parents. You're mean,
right?
So you don't get that until they go off and start hanging out with the other kids at school, because whatever happens to them is just the way life is. They don't know any difference.
Right. So what we wanted to put on the agenda today was something that I had gotten some articles sent to my inbox about, and I was reading these articles and I was thinking to myself, oh, I do so much of this when I do therapy, but I don't call it this. And so we are going to talk about Jung's concept of the shadow. That's why we started talking about the shadow, and you were saying you watched the radio, and I see pictures in my head when I read books.
Right.
But I do all of this work that Jung talked about. So Jung talked about the shadow as the parts of ourselves that we have inside of us that we want to keep hidden, either because we are embarrassed by them or because we think that if we disclose these parts of ourselves, that it will put us at risk for being hurt.
Yeah, and I see pictures when I read.
Exactly.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Right. So
well, I'm not raising one of those in my house.
Exactly. That's right. So I never said that ever again.
Right. Until just now.
Yeah. Well,
he's far enough away he can't quite reach you.
He's probably never going to hear this.
Right.
And he's probably far enough gone at this point that if he did hear it, he wouldn't know that I was talking about him.
Right.
Yeah. But
so why don't you spend a couple minutes, because you are the arbitrator of definitions and tracking data and so on. So explain what you mean by Jung and the shadow self.
I'm going to take that as a compliment. Oh, well, guess what?
What?
Somebody had been listening to one of our recent podcasts and heard
heaven forfend
and heard what you said about me when you first met me. And they said, did he really feel that way? So for everybody who hasn't heard this, we were doing a podcast, and Brett said, when I first met you, I didn't like you very much. Yeah. And somebody said, why would he say that about you? I said, I guess because it was true.
Yeah, it was true.
Yeah.
For those who are concerned, yes.
Yeah. But
I got past it.
Yeah. And so I'm going to take that as a compliment. But basically, Jung, who himself was raised by a very abusive father who happened to be a religious monk, was taught to be very, very religious. And a lot of Jung's work was informed by his experience in the church and very, very strict rules about religion and what you could believe and what you couldn't believe. But Jung himself was a very, very avid reader. His room was in the attic of their home in Switzerland, and he would read by candlelight to get away from his abusive father. And so that's what caused him to want to go into psychiatry when he went and got his medical degree. But a lot of this religious overtones permeated his work, and one of the things that he believed in very strongly was that all of us have this struggle in our psyche between good and evil, between right and wrong, the anima and the animus, the male and the female, and that in part we have this alter identity that he called the shadow, where we house all of the things that we feel like we can't show to the world. And he said that it's not that you wear a mask, so you don't put on a face when you keep the shadow stuff hidden, and what you do show people isn't false, it's true, but that you can't be a genuinely whole person until you are aware of and give credit and due to your shadow parts.
So I always thought of the shadow self in terms of my understanding of the British government, that they have a parliamentary system and they have members of parliament who become cabinet members of the prime minister's cabinet, and the party in power assigns that job. So you can be the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of the Treasury. But the party out of power assigns someone to be the shadow Secretary of Defense and the shadow Secretary of the Treasury. And they have access to all the same information. They don't have the power to make any decisions, but they can stay up with what's being done, why it's being done. Because under the parliamentary system, if the prime minister loses a vote of confidence, the government's out.
Right.
And then the interim government, until there's a new election, is made up of the shadow members of cabinet. So that's how I used to understand it. But that obviously it's wrong based on what you were.
No, I think that is no.
You think it's?
I think it's
close enough?
I think it's 100% valid, because the shadow government doesn't identify itself. It doesn't, and it's not so that there aren't newspapers articles written about it. They're not making press releases.
Right.
So they have all the same. So your shadow parts of your psyche have all the same information.
So they're aware of me and what I'm doing.
Yes.
And
yeah.
okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's not like we're dissociative where it all goes into a box and it's concealed and it doesn't have the same access to knowledge that your primary personality does. It has all of the same information.
Yeah.
It's just that it doesn't come out in the daylight.
Okay.
Yeah. And
but it attempts to manipulate me into behaving the way it wants to get its needs met.
It has influence, certainly. Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
That would be manipulation.
Yeah. I mean, and manipulation could, I don't think it consciously wants to manipulate like, oh, I'm going to trick. So manipulation for a lot of us has the connotation of I'm going to trick you into doing something.
Well, no, I was thinking of it like I see myself as a good person, a nonviolent person. I like people.
Right.
But every so often I see somebody I just want to slap,
Yeah.
especially a teenager that's acting out in some way. And I have this visceral, gut level reaction of I'd like to slap you right in the mouth. Now, I don't do that. Never have done that. But boy, do I want to sometimes. So I would say that desire to behave in that way is my shadow self.
Right.
That's trying to convince my regular self, my sunshine self, to behave in a way that it wants me to behave.
Okay, so then let me tell you a story, and then we'll say
Parse it out.
Yeah. So when you were talking about, I didn't like you very much, and I said, okay, and you said, well, I bet you had that reaction a lot, and I said, well, yeah, probably I did.
Yeah.
And I said that the reason that I acted that way when I was younger is to cover up a very, very deep-seated insecurity.
Yeah.
And so the bluster and the arrogance that I projected when I was younger was really about not letting people see the insecurity.
Yeah, but so what's behind your behavior now?
Well, I don't think I do that now.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so maybe we need to talk after the show.
No, I'm just messing with you.
But I don't know that my insecurity was trying to manipulate me into being to acting insecure, right? It was just a part of myself that I was trying
to make
to
you act big.
hide.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it was trying to make me act big, or if that was. So you would say that my shadow part was manipulating me into that show
And
of
all the bravado, so that people would think you were big and strong and whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I could get on board with that. Yeah.
Yeah, because it would quiet the anxiety. It
Yes,
it
and
ultimately
that's
would cause other kinds of anxieties that then you'd have to reconcile. But in the immediate moment, you can act that way.
Yes.
And you feel, because it's all about right now. It's all about the now. So I'm not coming into class as a new student and thinking about 2 years from now when we graduate, what will these people think about me? I'm thinking about in this class right now, how can I make this impression? They said,
yeah, and I do think that was a point that I did want to get to, and so I agree 100% that the manipulation of the shadow is designed to quiet the anxiety.
Yeah.
That's its purpose.
In the immediate moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so people engage in those behaviors because they are trying to look for some kind of relief from the anxiety, but until they're actually aware, and so this is also what Jung believed, until you are aware of what those shadow parts are, you're at their mercy.
So that's what we do in therapy. When people come in and we look for repetitive patterns in their life. How come every time I get success in my grasp, I work so hard to get to the point where life is going to change for me, something goes wrong. And usually it goes wrong because I've done something. I've dropped a stitch. I've not done something I should have done. I've spoken when I shouldn't have spoken, whatever it was. But then I see it just blow away into the distance again. And so I have to climb. It's like Sisyphus. I have to climb back up this mountain. And when I get almost to the top of the mountain, I fall back down. And so we look for the patterns of those occurrences.
Right.
And we posit or postulate that the shadow self is causing you to act out in such a way out of the anxiety. Almost a fear of success. It's a flight into dysfunction.
Well, I've always said that people don't have a fear of failure. People always talk
Have
about
a fear of success.
Yes. I've said
Because then
that
what?
since the very first day I started practicing psychology. And when you explain it to people, they say, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I think that absolutely we are conditioned.
Well, yeah. What if I ran for president and won, and then people expected me to
Right.
be presidential? That could really cause me some trouble.
Well, and also for then, me with the insecurity, if I won, then it would blow away my entire worldview, which is that I'm not worthy. I don't deserve any of that. And having to come to terms with the fact that I actually could achieve those things that I don't believe that I am worthy of would cause me to have to foundationally reconstruct from the very foundation my entire identity, which is something that people are ill-equipped to do.
I am not worthy that you should come under my roof. Speak but the word, and my soul will be healed.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so then what do you do when you actually are confronted with the opportunity to achieve those things that you feel like you're not worthy of?
Sabotage them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I can remember when my wife and I built, not the house that we live in now, but the house before that, my wife always wanted a 2-story house with, white, the stuff on the outside of the house.
Stucco?
No, not the stucco. The
Shutters?
boards. The
Clabbered?
Yeah, clabbered, but the siding with white siding and green shutters.
Yes.
Okay, so the house that we built before the house we live in now was a white 2-story house with white siding and green shutters, and we had a nice fence in the backyard.
Oh, I remember
and a
that
pool.
house. Saw that house. Yeah.
And I remember when we got ready to move into that house, my wife went through an intense existential crisis of what am I going to do now?
Yeah.
This is everything that I
if
ever
all
thought that
my
I would
dreams
have.
are answered, then what?
And we were in our early 30s, and she had gotten all this stuff that she thought she ever wanted, and her shadow was screaming at her, what do you think you're going to do now? You need to do something to mess this up because you don't deserve to have this.
It's like that song, Is That All There Is? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow.
And so one of the things that I like to work with people on is if you have achieved these things, first off, give yourself permission to achieve those things that you think you don't deserve. But once you do actually achieve those things, you have to then find something else that is beyond that to make life meaningful. And that's not hard to do. It's easy to do. It's sometimes hard to wrap your head around it.
I think, if I'm understanding what you're saying, the struggle for people to embrace their own success is a universal struggle and an extremely difficult one, because we've all been indoctrinated from childhood with messages about not getting too big for our britches,
Right.
not thinking too much of ourselves, not remembering or understanding that we have weaknesses and failures and inadequacies. I mean, we're reminded pretty regularly by life that we have those. And so we have dreams of overcoming them, of achieving some level of success, but we secretly know we don't deserve it.
That's right.
And if we get it, then we have a whole different bag of anxieties. I'm going to be found out, and it's going to be a disaster. And then everybody's going to say, well, yeah, we knew that.
And even beyond that, if you think about it, we've been sold a bill of goods on what we measure, the yardsticks we use to measure success in our society. Think about this. How many famous people do you know that are really, really comfortable with themselves? I mean, we see a lot of people who are hedge fund managers and they're accumulating all this wealth. I would argue those people do not feel successful.
I saw something the other day, quotation that was attributed to Elon Musk. And he said, people talk about the importance of education, and I'm not sure that I agree with the traditional definition of that. I'm adding to what he said. He said, I didn't get to go to Harvard, but an awful lot of the people that worked for me did.
Yeah. Now, and maybe Elon is comfortable with himself. I think Warren Buffett is an example of a person who is extremely rich but is comfortable with themselves. But I think a lot of people are not, who we traditionally view as successful. I think if you look in the media industry and you look at people like movie stars, how many of them have good, successful lives? They get married to each other, they get divorced, they have all kinds of drug addictions. I mean, I just read another article on the webs that Ben Affleck has now lost his sobriety again. These are people that we look at and we look up to. We think, oh, these people have it all, but they are struggling with the same kind of insecurities that the rest of us are.
And we forget that we're not looking at real people. We're looking at actors who play a role, who play roles. But
in their own lives, they're shadow parts.
But those shadow parts demand proofs. We acquire things, we collect things as visible proof of our worth and our success. So I have to have the right car, I have to have the right house, I have to have the right jewelry, I have to have the right clothes, I have to have the right friends, I have to belong to the right clubs, so that all those other people will know when they look at that, oh my God, he has all that stuff. He must have his act together.
But he may not.
Well, he most probably doesn't.
So, again, I have done this work for a long time, not calling it this. I will start calling it this. But whenever I'm working with somebody and trying to help them to look at their own ability to be comfortable with their own success, one of the things that I talk to people about is, what is your yardstick? How are you measuring that? Because if you don't know what the yardstick is, then you're going to buy into what society's yardstick is, which is wealth, power, and fame. And those things are not yardsticks of success. So I've always said that from a very young age, the only thing that I ever cared about was being a good dad. I wanted to be a good dad, and I wanted people to recognize me as a good dad. And I know that there are a lot of things in life that I've gotten wrong, that I still get wrong in my mid-50s. But one thing that I know is that anybody who knows me believes I'm a good dad. That, for me, is my yardstick for success, and I have learned to be very comfortable with that.
So in your mid-50s, do you need to update that? You're not dead yet.
I'm still a dad.
Okay. And you're still a good dad.
Yeah.
As long as your kids are alive, I guess.
Well, even if my kids weren't alive, I mean, I think that the work that I do is being a surrogate dad.
Okay.
I mean, so...
No, I get that. I see exactly that. And so that was the point I was driving towards.
Yeah.
Yeah. So because if you achieve your goal, if you reach it at an early age, then what do you have left to do in life? You have to.
But that's my point, is that you don't ever achieve the goal.
Right. Because
you can always be a good whatever you're measuring yourself as.
No, you have to reframe your defining rod.
But you have to figure out what it is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it has to be something that isn't like a lot of money or a lot of power or a lot of fame.
A tangible, quantifiable data point. Yeah. He has $500,000 in the bank. He must be a happy person.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I would even argue something that's more, I don't even know what the word would be, more cosmologically important. Oh. You know what I'm saying? Like just the concept of I have a lot of money.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any amount of money that would make a person happy.
But a cause, something like saving planet Earth or
exactly.
improving the water.
So if I have a lot of money and then that gives me the ability to do X,
right?
Yes.
Which is why Warren Buffett, to name one, and I'm blanking on his name, but the Microsoft guy, Bill Gates, are giving away so much money. I mean, for so many years their lives were defined by acquiring money, and now they're saying this is a responsibility that we've been given that allows us to impact things that need to be impacted in really positive ways.
Right. And I don't know Bill Gates, but just from the stuff that I've read, and
he and his wife have set up a foundation
to give away all of their money before they die,
right? Because
they don't have children. And when Bill was starting Microsoft and he was, had dropped out of college and people were like, oh my gosh, Bill, this is never going to go anywhere. And then it became ubiquitously, hugely popular. I don't think Bill Gates was a very happy person. I believe he is now. I believe it's because he found that yardstick that was meaningful.
Cosmological one.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So hopefully this conversation was educational for people. And as always, if you would like to get in touch with us, please go to www.psychwithmike.com. That's where episodes live. You can contact us there if you'd like to shoot us some ideas, or if you have the desire to be a guest on the show, please shoot us a comment and we can talk about that. The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. And if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.